Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Ora Cogan is a singer and songwriter whose music pulls from folk, country, psychedelia, and gothic rock. She holds it all together without flinching. Today we're putting the Tonearm's needle on Ora in connection with Hard-Hearted Woman, her latest album out on Sacred Bones. Ora has worked as a photojournalist and human rights advocate, and those experiences feed directly into how she thinks about art, resistance, and what the music is actually for. We get into all that, including her creative process, the long arc of folk music as a living tradition, and why staying soft in hard times is its own form of defiance. We're only here because of your support, as a listener, by sharing our work, and financially at thetonearm.com. So thank you. And now, Ora Cogan. Now the record's been out a little bit. I'm actually glad we had a little bit of delta in time between the release and the record being out. I'm curious about how your feelings about the music's evolved, how your relationship's changing with it as you perform it. I'm curious about your experience of the record.
So Hard-Hearted Woman came out, has it been like 3 months or something? Like 2.5 months?
Yeah, I think mid-March.
The big thing about the creative direction for me with this record, and I think this isn't an uncommon experience with people that are artists, is that I had a certain idea in mind or goals that I wanted to execute as an artist, or theories and methods and, concepts and stuff. And all of that went out the window as soon as I started working in a cohesive way. I thought I was going to be doing something that sounded quite a lot different. And what I ended up writing and working on was a lot more personal or simple, heartfelt, like more internal than cerebral in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of funny. It was frustrating. It was like, I want to do that, but I wanted to do this other thing. And of course, it's my choice. But I think that there was something that was kind of coming through that felt more impulsive or intuitive that I chose to respect and listen to, because every time I sat down to work, it just kept on coming up. So I'm like, okay, well, and then I reflected on that. It's like, well, maybe that's what I need, and maybe that's what needs to happen. And it seems to have resonated with other people in a meaningful way, but that's cool. It's always nice when that happens. We're like, okay, I guess, this is what it's going to be. And I guess I'm still processing the relationship with the music. It's been a lot of fun, it's too, it's maybe both a little bit sorrowful and like a happy thing, where it's, taking a lot of my personal kind of pain and grief and grievances and reckoning and, wrestling with the world, sharing that with other humans and getting through it and trying to have, some catharsis, I guess, in the process.
It's interesting to hear you give that answer, because when you started, you put the word artist in and you gave me air quotes with your with your fingers. And yet what you experienced and the way you articulated like the work of creating this and sharing your personal experience with the world channeled through your art, to me, that is the artist without air quotes. Like, that is the work of the artist. I'm curious, are you self-conscious about that word, or was that just a tick that you used? Or
No, I mean, I think that it's both serious work and a joke, I think that it's serious. It's very serious work being an artist, and it's important, and it is work, and it's meaningful. It's also not exclusive to some class of people or something. I think that's human work. Anybody can take up plenty of vocations as an art form by connecting to life. I don't know what definition we want to use when it comes to art, but
right.
in my mind, that should be like quite an expansive term, and maybe sometimes it's relegated to some kind of professionalism, or there are certain people that are, have some kind of singular genius or kind of brilliance or intuition or masterful skill. And a lot of the time it seems like that just has more to do with who has the privilege to spend time working on that rather than working some shit job or something. So I know plenty of art, like really ingenious artists that are indentured. I guess that's where the air quotes come from. It's like, well, maybe I feel hesitant because politics, because capitalism and patriarchy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just because like everything gets squished into and reduced, when we're talking about art under capitalism or in the context that we're living in. So I guess the air quotes are important. It's just kind of hard to
Yeah.
get at them.
By virtue of a lot of the music and art that I cover and people that I speak with, I talk to people who have what I'll sort of blandly call like portfolio careers. They don't have the luxury of just pursuing art as a way to make life work. Your point around like the artist isn't some like faraway genius. As much as I wish all artists could simply pursue their art, a lot of the people I speak with who live these more diverse lives, it brings a lot of meaning back into the art. It gives them more raw material. They're not these ascetics that are shut away. They're in the world and they're reflecting it and processing it. And that to me is crucial.
Oh, yeah.
So, as you might guess, a lot of music comes to me because, I'm doing my own research and listening and I'm getting stuff sent to me. And every once in a while, something stands out and sort of forces me to listen. And Honey was that song for me in the last few months. It has this sort of familiarity to it, but it still sounds it's a great entry point into the record and it really drew me in. As I've spent more time with your work and just, had learned more about you and your creative body of work, I'm curious about your relationship with political or the protest song, right? Because that song doesn't scream like stridency and it's not sloganeering.
Yep. Maybe we're all a little burnt out on explicit didactic sloganeering. Everybody's allowed to speak their truth in their own way. And I don't know how much time and space I want to take up in the room when it comes to this stuff. I've just got my own things to say. And
Yeah.
I want to support and uplift people that are facing oppression, that are facing fascism and facing the rise in this kind of hate and bigotry. I think people from the communities that are being targeted probably have an awful lot more to say about all this than I do. I'm going to use my voice because I've been asked to, and because we're all asked to speak out and use our platforms and use our skills and tools to fight for collective liberation, to be a part of a movement for me and my view and what I understand towards decolonization, towards justice, towards collective liberation, to see the great cruelties that are going on in the world as systems of oppression that are bolstered by a lot of apathy and a lot of complacency by the people who benefit from them. So I think that when it comes to politics, when it comes to protests, I see protests not as a badge of honor to wear. Once again, it's not about cult of personality. It's not about singular genius or how brave or stoic or exciting or meaningful somebody can be. It's about doing the dishes. It's about all of us taking on activism or solidarity, not as a badge of honor, but as a collective responsibility to each other and to the land and to, in a very harrowing time, just like helping, supporting, amplifying the voices of people that are often not respected or heard and all of that, so that's kind of my worldview when it comes to protest or when it comes to solidarity or it comes to politics. It's like looking around and being like, there are great conspiracies in the world. There are horrible conspiracies in the world. They're called white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, and Zionism. Anything that cuts life up into bits and says that some group of people should hold rank and power over everybody else. So, how do we fight against that? And how do we do it in the form of song? To me, that can be a lot of different things. And for me, in a very personal way, that's somatic work. So it's like, whatever I'm trying to understand, that kind of gentler, subtle work of embodiment, of understanding and being present with all of the feelings of holding all of that inside of myself and just dealing with that as feels right to my spirit and trying to do that in a humble way. Trying to be present, be in my body through witnessing grave injustices in this world and saying, okay, there are dishes to be done, there are practical things to be done, there are ways to get involved here. And then there's also this kind of, when it comes to art, there's this other kind of work that can be a little more enigmatic. How do I stay connected, not get overwhelmed by how awful things are, and tap out into apathy, tap out into complacency, tap out into fight or flight trauma response, how do you stay here and respond like an adult and be present and try to have like a sense of humanity and joy inside and connection inside while you're picking yourself up and dusting yourself off and hopefully going about the work of being a part of collective liberation and justice. So,
Yeah.
I think that's where that kind of spirit comes from. I'm not a spokesperson, for anybody here except for my own little self. And I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I'm sitting here and I'm watching friends of mine be faced with really brutal legislation in the States that's taking away their human rights. Trans rights are human rights, in a specific form for a specific demographic, but nonetheless, they're human rights issues. And I'm watching people, with this hateful, angry rhetoric towards people I love, towards friends and community members and people that I love, and whether they're in my life or not, whether they're whatever my connection is, they're human beings. And just, what is this hate, focusing on people that have this kind of anti-trans rhetoric and feverish sort of vitriol against these people and being like, why are you so threatened by people that are just existing and living like they always have in our world? We're not cookie cutters and everybody gets to be who they are. And what's so scary about this? And trying to examine where that hate and ignorance comes from, and how do you approach it as once again being a part of a system.
Yeah.
A system where instead of paying attention to the historic injustices against marginalized people, against communities that have faced injustice, that somehow white people often seem to struggle so much with the burden of just acknowledging these systemic forms of oppression and just sitting with, wow, maybe I'm on the wrong side, or maybe I carry a burden of responsibility for living in an unjust society, that instead of doing that, there are all of these concocted alternate realities that are being drummed out that paint us as the victim. It's like, well, wait a second, why don't you just sit with this? And instead of pushing back at it, just sit with it and say, well, how can I turn this into your responsibility? Versus like, it's not about, just, hating yourself. Just how do you sit with that uncomfortable truth of real-time events in history and say, well, how can I take on a responsibility to do better, to be a part of something better? So, just trying to, that's where honey came from. It's kind of facetious. It's like, oh, you hard-hearted woman for just being and thinking about how that fear kind of permeates people when they buy into bigotry, when they buy into this kind of hateful rhetoric, where you think that somebody just walking down the street, being in their truth is oppressive to you. I think sometimes that's out of a great fear and oppression for what's inside, that, you see these people that maybe have relegated themselves in some way or restricted their own spirits or their own hearts, that they see somebody else really living in their authenticity and something that feels right to them, and they feel attacked by it because they feel jealous and they feel insecure about the ways that they've condemned themselves to a binary or condemned themselves to some internalized hatred, and it goes on. But I'm trying to understand it, and I could be wrong about things, but the process of songwriting is listening, thinking about them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but it's a hard one to get into.
I appreciate the point you made there towards the end about you try to understand, like, what is this hatred about? Where does it come from? Like, why are you so fixated on this person's choice or person's life that has really nothing to do with you? If you would just like, you could even choose to look away if that would make you feel less threatened by this. And but when you were speaking earlier, what the thought that came to me was this notion about how, especially in the last whatever interval, however we want to measure the length of time, the people most entrenched in power have like the biggest sense of grievance. And I can't help but tie it to the zero sum nature of capitalism, right? Like if you get something, that somehow means I don't get it, as opposed to there's enough for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a zero sum game, that it's a competition. And weirdly, when you think about the way that these systems of thinking that are quite old, that see nature itself that way, that zero in on an interpretation of nature that itself, that it's a big, violent competition, that everything's out to get at each other's throats. And, having spent enough time in the natural world myself with people that have much different worldviews and watching animals and watching the land, and just, yeah, just like I was just hanging out with my godmother. There's this horse hanging out in the valley that she lives in. He doesn't want to work, so he just kind of took off. So he's kind of half wild and he's just hanging out in this valley and he's welcome to be there. And there are coyotes and there are bears around and there's all sorts of stuff going on, but nobody's messing with the horse. Fear is a horrible filter to look through. It can motivate people to do the most horrible things.
Yeah.
And when you have a fear that's imposed on the other,
Yeah.
whether that's nature itself, which really is the sum of all of the horrible systems in my worldview and my way of seeing things, that fear and, and hatred of nature itself, or whether it's another group of people, or, when you project all of your demons, all of your shadows, all of your worst fears onto somebody else, you can really see a monster. And it's good to keep that in mind, especially if you have power, because you can do an awful lot of damage, if you've got a gun in your hand and you feel that way about somebody else. So it's just like unpacking that and undoing that and trying to understand that and trying to take responsibility and be like, I'm Jewish, I'm white, I'm relatively very privileged place in the world. This position of privilege in a really unjust society, in a cruel society that was born out of colonization. And, how do you sit with that and take responsibility and do something beautiful and meaningful with life in a framework that actually makes sense, and moving towards justice and moving towards liberation in an honest way, in a careful way. Just trying to, once again, like just looking at all this stuff, trying to understand it, trying to understand inside, and also looking around and saying, like, what are these systems, and really examining them? What are the systems that I'm a part of, and taking responsibility for that, like where it's like, okay, like where is this from and how can we change it?
Was there ever a time for you where you envisioned a life that wasn't as an artist? Was there ever an alternate path you entertained or you were pursuing?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a teenager, I was studying silversmithing. I left home when I was young, did an apprenticeship in jewelry making, and that was really, because I always knew I wanted to be a musician. So the answer is no. Like I think I always wanted to play music more than anything else. But I worked. I did that apprenticeship in hopes that I could make a living at something that would sustain music. It's a given that it's pretty hard to make a living playing music. I tried to learn about business and learn about entrepreneurship as an artist, making jewelry so that I could pay the bills that way. And I did sometimes. I struggled with that. I was like, oh, this is like, like mining silver. And I don't know, it wasn't the right thing for me. And I worked loads of labor jobs and service jobs. I worked at restaurants and cafes. I did landscaping and farm work and like worked some funny jobs too. I made nipple tassels for strippers with this little tassel that go around and around. That was a wild job.
That's great.
Yeah, worked at farmers markets, worked at a chocolate store for about 8 years. When I got into my 30s, I started working for different organizations as a contractor and doing media and communications. That was really awesome. Ever since I was a teenager, I felt this heavy heart about the world, thinking about colonization and white supremacy, thinking about cruel systems of repression, and wanting to do something to be a part of standing up against that and choosing a better road together. So I got to do this work, and a lot of it was grunt work, but it was still like being a part of working for organizations that were advocating for human rights, for climate justice, for Indigenous rights. That was a huge, important part of my life and still is, should be more. Like I should be doing way more than I am.
Mm.
At another point, I got into photojournalism, and it was very much focused on the same issues, but in a different way. So I put it aside, working, for anybody. And I was doing independent media, writing articles and publishing photos. So a different commitment and different responsibility than doing media and communications from an advocacy point where, with journalism, you're accountable to just say what is as best as you can in service of people making their own mindset about situations. And of course, we all have our values and stuff like that. I came into it with my own values, but I wasn't telling my story. I was there to witness. Like you said before, like a lot of the artists that you talk to, they don't have this singular path in life. They have other work as well. And I feel the same way. Like, I mean, once again, capitalism, it's like everything's, a vocation. It's either you're valid as 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 a professional or you're a hobbyist or something, and it's kind of a funny value system to put on things. So at the end of the day, I'm alive on this planet with everything and everyone else. And all of that stuff, whether it's digging a trench or writing an article or writing a song or doing some dishes, it's a part of just being a human. And like I said before, like the work that I got to do that had more to do with human rights and environmental justice. And once again, like the way that I see that is very much like the civil service or doing the dishes or picking up trash on the side of the road, or that work is meant for all of us as much as we can to our capacity, as far as I'm concerned. That work of taking care of each other, taking care of the land, making sure that we're living in a society, trying to make a society that is not cruel, that is based on respect and dignity for everybody, that everybody gets to be safe and feed their families and have dignity and respect in their life.
When I hear you speak on that, what strikes me is that it feels like it's a different type of usefulness, right? It's a usefulness to your world, however large or small you draw the circle.
Right.
It's not usefulness in terms of like measured in your productivity or in your economic unit of output. It's like fellowship.
And it's a hard thing to gauge that kind of stuff if you try to measure it anyways. It's like, how do you know what's useful? How do you know if you're going to do anything that's meaningful to anybody? You hope that you will. There are a lot of people that have set out to do good that have done an awful lot of harm.
Yeah.
That's not meant to be quantified, maybe. but I know that it's meaningful. I know that when we go out, when I go out with the band and we're playing these shows, it obviously feels good for people. That's what they're saying, that it's good. People are dancing, they're getting together in a room, doing something that feels cathartic and feels all sorts of ways for, different people, because it's not a singular experience. But I know that there's something about this particular music that's helpful right now, because I wish that I was the kind of person where I could just respond to the best in life and just focus on that. Like, I've got people in my life that are such angels, and that's how they move through the world. And they're able to just float above it, all of the bullshit, all of people's bullshit, and just keep on responding to the good. And there's something in me where I just need to hold the pain, and like I need to hold all the feelings and move through it. Like, my only way out is through. And I've always been like that ever since I was young. It takes me a long time to get through things. I need to really work them out inside and feel them and to really wrestle with stuff and try to understand it. But I need to get through too. And I need to dance and feel good and have a good sense of humor and feel some levity and joy. And I think that's a lot of what music has been for me. And it's what seems to be serving a purpose, is that, a lot of this for me starts with a lot of pain and anger, and it ends up being cathartic, moving through that and being able to let it go and let it go through and speak to this stuff, but also find a sense of joy and beauty and keeping my human soul alive.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have your creative practice for that. I'm grateful for you that you have that ability to process whatever it is you need to process through your work.
I think it's a good tool for a lot of people, honestly. There's some kind of magic in that, that when you think about it, and this isn't unique to me at all, like it's a practice for a lot of people, where you can take sometimes the most harrowing things that have ever happened to you and talk about them and move through them and find a way to free yourself and transform your relationship to things, like that in different ways. Like, I'm not advocating for anybody to do anything, but that's been my experience of it anyways, or finding different ways of kind of moving through the pain and reestablishing yourself in a way that feels more connected to life in a better way. Even, like as a meditation, as like a spell or something, where you take something that's got a lot of power over you that you don't want to have power over you, and you change your relationship to it. That's magic. And it manifests in the world too. Right. It's like, like I remember being at protests when I was working as a journalist, and there are these cops that show up, and they just seem so tough and angry, and they've got guns, and they're pretty, ominous and stuff. But then you get these kids that just don't buy into that fear mongering that seem to be happening. They just show up and they've got their sense of humor, and they're not falling for it. Like, no, I'm not going to give you power. I'm not going to give you what you're looking for. And you see it with ICE and the way that people are standing up, and they're in the face of these people that are acting as the henchmen of a very cruel system. And these like brave people that are going and standing up, for their community and other people's communities and saying no. And a part of that, is somatic, and it's energetic work. It's in the music, it's in the art, it's in culture, it's in like ways that people hold on to their dignity and humanity and joy and humor and all of that.
Obviously, you record under your own name. You're in air quotes, solo artist. But, it's not just you and a hammered dulcimer singing, folk music. Obviously, I would imagine different people, different sounds are necessary for different pieces, for different works.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about contributors and collaborators? Do you write for individual people and their sound, or are you saying, oh, I need this type of, how do you think about collaborators? What do you look for in collaborators?
It's nebulous. It can be a lot of different things. What I mostly, look for is to make sure that those relationships are good, that the communication is good, that there's respect. Musicians like that do support work in somebody else's vision need to be given a lot more money and respect and attention, because there are a lot of really fabulous artists that lend themselves to somebody else's vision in a certain project, and they're giving a lot. It's cool to look at that through that lens and go back in the history of music and see like big artists that made a huge name for themselves, and think about all the artists that they played with and how they wrote those bass lines or those drum lines and all that kind of stuff, I don't think the work that I'm doing now would feel as meaningful without all the awesome people that I'm playing with. And I feel I'm really lucky, like I'm getting to work with such awesome people. Really, that nature of collaboration really depends on the nature of who I'm working with and what we want to do together, what feels right. There are certain people I've been working with for quite a while now who are more of my creative process than others, like Finn Smith, who plays drums with me on tour. He also was the assistant producer in the recording sessions for the past couple records. He co-arranged stuff with me. He's been a big part of this past few years. That's been like a really exciting part of my journey with music. And Nancy Pache, who plays bass with me as well. Like we just had our 2-year band anniversary where she's been on the road with me for a couple years, and it's been pretty awesome working with her. And like so many people that I'm getting to work with now that really believe in my writing and they contribute a lot. It doesn't always really do the music justice to just have it under my name. It's like maybe just a default sometimes. I think a lot of that has to do with that it starts with me alone in a room most of the time. Like it starts with the writing and starts with something that's deeply personal and using my human body as the main instrument to sing. So that ends up being quite a personal thing a lot. Maybe once again, it's that kind of transformational nature of art and maybe existence, where it's like it might start with that, but then a lot of the time, whatever started is this deeply personal thing for me that's so individualist and so particular ends up being quite a collective thing. And that's true for a lot of the music. And then a lot of it came out of a vision for me of like, it's just this simple kind of dream where, during the pandemic where I'm like, alone working in my room with my dog and then just being like, all I want is to be in a big fun band, where there are more people on stage than there are in the audience. And then I met all these awesome people and, it happened. And yeah, Finn's killer, Nancy's killer. Ida Maidstone's touring with me. She's got her own project that's really, really fun. She plays synth and sings. And Jesse Conradson on guitar. And they're all Nanaimo-based musicians with their own projects. Nance does her own singer-songwriter thing. She's working on a record. And Finn has a clown jazz improv project that's really awesome. They're all up to a lot of cool stuff. And then I work with Tom Dice. I've been working with him for about 10 years. He's up in upstate New York and has a recording studio there. And he's a real savant, really skilled and knowledgeable, and plays many instruments, engineers, and has worked as a producer with me in the past as well. He worked on Crickets with me as a co-producer. He played a lot and he sang a lot on this last record. He's really awesome. And then David Perry here in Victoria, who I've recorded the past 3 records with, and he's an enigma. He comes up with these crazy guitar lines and has such a great way of recording, analog. I don't know. You don't hear people record drums the way that he records drums anymore. He's a student of the 60s and 70s and analog recording and does a lot for the music. It wouldn't be nearly as good without him. So it's maybe the funnest part of playing music is getting to do those things in collaboration. And I'm humbled, like super, super humbled that all these really, really brilliant, really kind and really fun people, are willing to take time and energy out of their own work and lend themselves to this, whether it's coming out on the road or working on a record yeah, it's pretty awesome. I feel super, super, super lucky.
I'd like to get some thoughts from you on folk music. The notion of folk music as basically recording stories that may not otherwise be preserved, or they sit outside the sort of official narrative or canon, an alternative way of documenting all those notions of recording and capturing stories. And I'm curious about, what does a song like Katie Cruel mean to you? And like, you return to this song, right? Like, what is that about for you?
I mean, I think it's very much music of the people, the history books of the people, the history that isn't recorded in textbooks. And it's very much working class history in a lot of ways. It's an interesting one. I feel less married to folk music now and more maybe to the spirit of it, that folk music can be a lot of things. I think somehow folk music in some ways has been sort of whitewashed and reduced to a sort of LARPing where you can just like put on a moo and LARP as a peasant or something, or, have a nice folky time without talking about politics or without reckoning with real shit. That somehow like, what capitalism can do to a lot of art forms is like suck the spirit of it through its nose, like scrape out all of the history and the context and the significance, stories, and cultural relevance of things. Like, I want to give a lot of respect and meaning and humility and honor to specific folk traditions that can be really unique, that you can't make a broad statement and say, well, this is what it is, because you're talking about individual families, songs that have lived within certain families, cultures, communities on their own terms in these really beautiful, meaningful ways. And I don't want to approach all of that like some kind of scientist that's studying it, like it's just like we're talking about, like you wouldn't want to walk into somebody's family home, at their dinner table and just start asking all these questions about their family. Like some stuff is private, it's got significance, it's got purpose and meaning and communities and stuff. And maybe the way to understand that can be complex and nuanced, and it depends on where you are and where you're coming from and stuff. It's just such a kettle of worms.
Yeah.
And I think there is some really interesting, like my friend Ian Lynch does a lot of really interesting work to do with Irish traditional folk. And he has a podcast that I really recommend called Fire Draw Near, and he's living inside of that, right? He's Irish and he plays a lot of traditional music. He also plays experimental music and, heavy kind of undefinable stuff. And what the boundaries of all of that are, when it comes to music and folk, is interesting because like, what's our folk music now? Are you going to put people outside of that because they're not playing an acoustic guitar and wearing a fedora? Maybe noise is folk, maybe punk is folk, or hip hop, or all these different forms that are an expression of the people in their communities. We can kind of get caught up in like compartmentalizing or reducing things in a certain way and making it palatable or making it, defining it in these kind of funny terms when really they should be like expansive and complex. And, I think that there is definitely like a really interesting time that we're in right now. Beautiful, like exciting time in music where I think more people are feeling this kind of ethos and spirit of really learning about music history and culture, not in this kind of voyeuristic academic way, but in a real human way, and connecting with different traditional forms of music, but also connecting with contemporary music and innovation and seeing, like breaking down some of the walls, but also breaking down walls and testing challenging concepts, but also in the same time, holding a lot of mindfulness and respect and care for tradition, having respect for people that carry these songs that we talk about when we talk about folk music, but also having a lot of respect for young people today speaking about things and doing things in their own terms. Yeah, with Katie Cruel is an interesting one because Katie Cruel, as far as we know, is written about a sex worker who's traveling with light infantry soldiers in Scotland hundreds of years ago. So it's this song. When I first came to town, they called me the Roving Jewel. Now they changed their tune. They called me Katie Cruel. When I first came to town, they brought me the bottles funny. Now they changed their tune. They bring me the bottles empty. I don't know why this song has haunted me for years. And at first I did it in a kind of country style when I first recorded it over a decade ago, or maybe 12 years ago or something like that. I recorded it in Spain when I was on tour. It got picked up by this kind of DIY label in Spain when I was, in my mid-20s. And And I met some really great musicians from the kind of punk scene there, and this great drummer who, we got together and we made this live record called Ribbon Vine, and we recorded this kind of country western version of Katie Cool. And over the years, I've kept on coming back to it, and I recorded it again because it's still in my set. It's still something that I want to play almost every night. It's just kind of the same feeling as honey. It's like, you can call me whatever the hell you want. I really don't give a shit.
Wow.
Like that kind of, that feeling, that sentiment of like, I will not let anybody reduce my friends or myself in the name of patriarchy or whatever the hell. That kind of feeling is like, that's my interpretation of Kitty Cruel now. It's changed and shifted in this kind of spirit of, that it's a dance song. It's like the way that we do it, it's fun and it's upbeat and it's uplifting and it's meant a lot of different things over the years to me. It's like, when you spend that much time with the song, it's kind of morphed and shifted and changed in my own mind. At one point, it was about sexism and just thinking about sex workers too, how that work is demeaned and how people that do that work are demeaned and can be dehumanized, which is so dangerous and so awful. Thinking about women, thinking about anybody that's reduced or minimized, the way that so many people are for really unjust reasons. And in another way, it was about aging, thinking about that line, like when I first came to town, they called me the roving jewel. Now they changed their tune and they call me Katie Cruel. And thinking about friends of mine who are older than me who talk to me about how, when they hit their 40s or 50s, people just started just dismissing them and not wanting to hear anything they had to say, and that somehow they lost their value in society because they're older women and nobody cares about what older women have to say. And they're not seen as beautiful or interesting or that there's this kind of fetishized thing about younger women, which is cruel for all of us, whether you're being fetishized or not.
Yeah.
Or you're either getting scary attention and being dehumanized in that way, or you're being dismissed as irrelevant, like all that kind of stuff. So hearing that in the lyrics, and really like feeling it, that spirit of, oh, I am absolutely not going to let the ubiquitous you out there, like the whatever it is, this energy in this, force field that's created by an unjust system, define my worth or value or anybody else's. That we're all valuable because we're here. It's somatic.
Yeah. I use that word a lot as well. Yeah.
It is healing because it's like that facetiousness or scrappiness is like actually just a gateway to dignity and respect. So it's, it's like, it's serious and it's really funny at the same time because I'm not going to just give away my power to this stupid thing. But even like on that note, it's so funny that so many people told me in my 30s, they're like, well, you gave it a chance, you gave it a shot, and it just didn't work out because, it's like, maybe you should try doing something else because, it didn't work out. And sure enough, like I'm in my 40s and I'm having the best time of my life playing music in the worst possible times, but feeling like there's a sense of purpose for what I do and meaning and feeling a sense of global community and network with like-minded people and a lot of heart and meaning and spirit. And a time of my life where I've just been told so much that this is when everybody drops off and they just think you're irrelevant and that you have nothing to say and offer and do. And it's like, well, maybe that's not something you should pin on anybody, that there's like a certain time in life that we value people and don't, and, all that kind of stuff. And it's, it's talked about in this way, or it used to be talked about in this way where it's just the way that it is, and you just get used to it, it's like, well, fuck that. Yeah, it's a cool song. I don't know how long it's going to stick with me, but I think I've learned a lot from holding something like that for so long, where it just felt like it was meant to be there and have that kind of shifting meaning where I'm learning new things about life from this one song, just playing it over and over again.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
One song. It's incredible. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for making time for me, and thanks for listening to my rants.
Thank you so much, Ora Cogan, and thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you've enjoyed this conversation, check out the over 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, sign up for Talk of the Tonearm, our weekly newsletter, wherein you'll find Rotations, our weekly radio show. You can also become a paid supporter at the Support Us link on the website. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design, that's Terry Grant. Our theme music is by Birdie, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. Right now on the Tonearm, you'll find features on Portland field recordist and ambient composer Patricia Wolf, Vermont musician and storyteller Bob Wagner, Beijing art pop artist Mixol, experimental sound artist Joseph Branciforte, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.